Hello, this is Ryan McDonald at Shade Digital, and this is Creating a Digital Marketing Agency, Episode 3. And today I want to talk about how there's no guarantees in advertising. There's not one. In fact, if you're looking to hire an agency or a professional for your company for like an internal position, that's a great qualifying question to ask. Can you guarantee me X result or Y result? And there's no guarantees in advertising. And as much data that comes in for digital marketing, you still can't make a guarantee. I can make predictions, I can forecast, and I can, oops. I can make predictions, I can make forecasts based on data, but I can't make guarantees. I expect certain things to happen when I look at historical data, right? And I know I've been doing this long enough to know the changes that I make in an advertising program, what the expected result should be. But at the same time, it's still trial and error, right? You start with a hypothesis, you execute on that, you analyze the data that comes back, and you reiterate. That's what digital marketing is. And if it sounds like the scientific method, that's because it is. It is. So there's no guarantees in advertising. But, and I'm going to make a caveat. There's some things that are just overwhelmingly obvious, right? I launched this online marketing campaign. I will guarantee you that someone will click on it, right? You can make but if someone ever says, you start Google AdWords and I guarantee you will make $1 million. That's bullshit. It's 100% bullshit. There's no guarantees. It's just not a thing. It's just not a thing. But on the flip side of that, when you have a boatload of historical data to work with, you're able to better predict the future. Now, it's different than a guarantee, but I can look at, an AdWords account that's been running for a year or two, right? Look at the trends, look at what's performing, what's not performing, etc. And I can say, oh, I make X, Y, and Z change, and I think I'll make your AdWords account like 13% more efficient, right? I think that if we introduce a remarketing campaign of a 30-day duration limit, that we can get, X amount of incremental sales. These things are predictable when you've been doing it for as long as I have, which granted, there's people out there who've been doing it way longer than me, but there's no guarantees. And I still know people who are in the business, and it's mostly salespeople, right? It's not the people who are actually clicking the buttons and making the things happen. It's the sales guy who wants to close the sale. And they will say things like, you make this change on your website and I guarantee double your conversion rate. And it hurts my head to even think about it, because it's just not how. You just can't say that. It's just such an ignorant thing to say. But a sales guy's a sales guy. He's working on closing the sale, and then it falls on the implementers, which is historically me. I've done a little bit of sales in the past, right, for Shade Digital, my digital marketing agency, and as an account manager at another agency, I would occasionally sell. I would get a commission off it, so it was just for like extra money. But I'm not historically a sales guy, and my sales game is not strong. In fact, it's pretty weak. So it would fall on someone like me to then try to execute to the best of my abilities to get that double conversion rate. And it's never good when you set the expectations so high from the onset. It's far better to under promise and over deliver. And sometimes in the excitement of trying to close a sale, people can lose that mindset. Yeah, and I want to say that, so, Shea Digital, is a relatively new advertising agency. I started it in January, full-time. I've always done some freelance stuff, but went full-time on it in January. So it's pretty much a brand new business at this point. And I'm getting interest from a lot of young companies as well, right? Like startups, etc. Or people who are, maybe it's an established company, but they've never actually done online advertising before. And I want to say this, that without being a brand new company with no brand equity in your space, and just starting out, your path is infinitely harder than if you started 2 years ago. The marketing dollars build on itself, and as you increase your brand recognition in your space, it lifts all KPIs. So when I was just starting out marketing, I started an e-commerce marketing position. That's what they called it. It was an e-commerce marketing intern at a billion-dollar company. And so that was my first proper exposure to, right, how a big city or a big company does things. Where was I going with this? I completely lost my train of thought. I saw it reflected on the camera too, like a hair or something float down, and it distracted me. Terrible podcast. Terrible. Oh yeah. Okay. Startups. So if you have no historical data, etc., and you've never done this before or played around in this space, it becomes infinitely harder to, if you've never spent advertising dollars before, everything's just been referral from friends and current customers. That's great, but the wider market might not know of your existence, and depending on what you're selling, that can pose problems, right? So when you take on the challenge of helping launch a new business or a investment funded business, or whatever startup, there's going to be some initial issues, right? Product market fit might not be there. That's something that is rarely talked about with when it comes to advertising agencies. So many advertising agencies out there act like they could sell ice to Eskimos. Product market fit is just as important as your tactics, as your messaging, as your value propositions. Who cares if you're selling the world's best sock if you got no legs? Who cares? And with startups, right, they might not have found that product market fit, where they're still trying to navigate that path to profitability or sustainability, etc. And so sometimes when you take on the challenge of helping a new business, you got to really look at the product and think, is this good? Is this something I want to be a part of? But you have to be very proactive about recommending website changes, using your early data to iterate quickly, because you need to pivot quickly when it comes to working with startups. They're not going to let you create a campaign, let it run for 3 months so you can get a crap load of data, stop, analyze, and then iterate. Usually it's much faster than that. You got to be running things and looking at things in a shorter time frame, which sometimes is shooting yourself in the foot depending on the product, right? Some things have larger or longer buying cycles than others. You know, so it's so much harder to start a brand new advertising program for a business that has never done it than it is to improve an existing one. Let's say that. So if you've never done it before, like I said, you might not have that brand equity in the space. And then, I remember why I was talking about. Yeah, so increase, like, the strength of your brand, right, is going to directly, it's going to lift all KPIs, all of them across the board. The stronger your brand, it's just so much easier to do everything, right? Name it. Click-through rate, right? And I think in a digital mindset. So if you're listening to this and you're like, live in the print world, think if it was, I don't know, direct mail, think open rate, right? Time on site, right? Conversion rate. How much is trusting a brand or knowing who that brand is and having like faith in that brand affect conversion rate, right? That's a hard thing to measure, apples to apples, because no company is the same. So the strength of your brand will lift all KPIs. And that's something that I didn't always think about when I started out in marketing. I thought in a text ad, direct response only sort of sense. I was thinking to myself, all these companies spending money on branding, giant waste of money. But as I've been doing this longer and longer, I realized what incorrect thinking that is. Branding lifts everything. It's so much easier to grow a brand that's known in its space than it is to start brand new. It just is. So yeah, and it's one of those things that it's like pushing a snowball down a hill, right? It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes down the hill. The marketing dollars you spent last month, last year, 2 years ago, build up your profile in the industry or in your category, and it helps today, right? Even though you spent that money, a year ago or 2 years ago, there's some trailing effect, and it helps things out today. And so you gotta have patience. You gotta have understanding that it's a lot of trial and error when it comes to starting a new program, new advertising program, right? If you've never sold e-commerce before, that's going to be a trial and error process. I start with my experience and my assumptions and what I know to have worked in similar cases or for similar products or services, and try it, right? And then take in that data, analyze that data, and iterate. That's the general process. There's the secret sauce, right? It's just the scientific method. Let's see. So there's no guarantees in advertising. It's easier to improve a current advertising program than start a new one. Talked about that. Man, other than that, let's talk a little bit about Shade Digital. So I have closed, at least word of mouth, my 5th client. Again, starting in January, so that's not too bad. Closed my 5th client for the agency, just waiting on payment now, but that'll be a cool one. I am very optimistic about this client. It's a relatively new one in terms of like, it's a relatively new business, but I've worked in this space before, this dropship e-commerce, and they're in a niche that I think is has a lot of money in it for one, and is not that competitive for two. And I know the guy running it, and he's got well over a decade of e-commerce experience, of high-level e-commerce experience, like running shit. And this is something that now he's doing on, he's got his own thing. So I'm very excited about that. I might be flying out to Las Vegas. I mentioned on maybe the first creating a digital marketing agency podcast that it's part of this group called Jumanjo. Basically, it's a guy I used to know who's been working in the, well, still know, right? I still know the guy. A friend of mine who is working in this space, and he is starting kind of like a collective of people who are highly specialized in their fields and know what the fuck they're doing. And so he sort of works as like helping these businesses find the best people to solve their problems. And of course, he is one of those people. And it looks like we might have a client out on the West Coast. And so I'm super pumped to fly out to Vegas. That's where we're meeting the client, and sit down, whiteboard out some strategy, close that deal, and start executing. That'd be a big client, and yeah, big clients are fun. Generally, big clients are where the margin's at. You know, a lot of advertising agencies complain about, you know, how this is a relatively low margin business, and I would say that it's just not entirely accurate. Because I know agencies that have 60% margins, right? And I know there's a ton of agencies out there who have 10, 15% margins. And so it's such a wide spectrum for doing literally the exact same thing. That it's how you set up the business, like where your leads come from, etc. But a big variable is your average revenue per client. If your average revenue per client is low, and let's say you have one account manager, you have to have that account manager work on so many accounts that I feel like they're not giving enough attention to a single account to like guide it through strategy, to keep testing, to keep pushing the limits, right? So I really want to keep the accounts to account managers ratio low. And that requires bigger margin clients to do it, because you have to pay for that account manager. You have to pay for the support people, HR, legal, accountants, etc., creatives, right? So I have that in mind as I move in my head from going from a one-man shop to start hiring people, because I'm at 5 clients now. I've got some more in the pipeline, and I'm starting to wonder when the hell I'm going to hit my limit, because I'm now starting to get so much work on a day-to-day basis that it becomes harder to work on my own business, as well as do things I might enjoy. So I'm starting to consider when and what position and who to hire. And I've never realized what a big decision hiring is, right? It just came second nature. Yeah, businesses hire people, right? But when you're on the other side, on the business owner side, and you're sitting here thinking, man, I've got X amount of resources, and I could, invest it in here or here or here or there, and it's such a risk. Hiring is such a risk, but it's also got a great reward to it, right? It frees up your time to do other things. Sometimes you hire people who are better than you at what that position is, and that's awesome, right? I don't want to hire, and granted, I might have to hire some junior level people, train them up, who knows, depending on my margin situation. But long term, it should be the goal of every hiring manager to hire someone who's better at you, in an executional way, right? So, but yeah, so that'd be cool. Close that client. I'm looking at, so this nice house that has served as my backdrop for the last, I guess since I started doing this in January. Been living in it since last May, and I believe I'm going to leave at the end of this lease. I'm going to get something that's a little smaller, not as nice, unfortunately, but use those savings to invest into an office, a proper office. Right now, I'm working out of my home office, which is fine for being 2 months into a new business and just being a one-man shop, right? But I can't hire somebody and bring them to my house, right? It just isn't gonna, it's just not something to do. And also getting that office space really kind of plants that flag in the ground and said, you know, this is mine, we're here, etc. So having to downgrade to get an office, and my fiance is surprisingly happy with it. You know, I pitched it along the lines of, because I'm getting married this year, right? So wedding ring and honeymoon I'm paying for. Thankfully her parents are paying for the wedding. Otherwise we'd be getting married probably right back out there, just because of how, you know, the honeymoon costs, wedding ring costs, investing in a business. So yeah, she's very cool with it, and I'm grateful to have support like that. Because it's not fun to say, hey, you know, we might be able to afford this, but to be responsible with our own personal fiscal situation, let's downsize and let's reinvest in the business. So yeah, that's super neat. Let's see, anything else? I mean, there's so many things I can talk about, right? So many things. By the way, if you have any questions, post them or shoot me an email. My email, I believe, is in the about section of my YouTube channel. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Like, it doesn't have to be like sales or sales related. If you're stuck on a problem for a certain campaign, reach out. You know, if you want to talk about your experiences as a new entrepreneur, reach out. You know, I'm a pretty helping guy in general, right? So yeah, let's wrap this one up. So, all right, this has been Ryan McDonald. Worst ending ever. This has been Ryan McDonald at Shade Digital. Subscribe, like, comment, share, and have a good rest of your day. All right. Thank you. Bye.